What if I told you the most feared rifle in history started as a desperate answer to muddy trenches and frozen winters? That the weapon Russians loved was also the weapon its creator came to regret. By the end of this story, you might see the AK-47 not just as a gun, but as a mirror into a nation's fears, pride, and contradictions. This is the story of how one man's trauma became the world's most ubiquitous weapon, how a nation wrapped its identity around 7.62 millimeters of steel, and how an instrument of defense became a symbol of everything from liberation to oppression. This is the story of why Russians loved the AK-47. The year is 1941. The Eastern Front is a nightmare of mud, blood, and metal. Mikhail Timofeyevich Kalashnikov, a senior sergeant and tank commander, is 21 years old. October, the Battle of Bryansk. A German shell tears through his T-34 tank. Shrapnel rips into his shoulder and chest. He's evacuated, barely conscious, as his unit is decimated around him. In the hospital, as morphine fog lifts and infection sets in, Kalashnikov hears something that will change history. Soldiers complaining. The bolt froze again. 3 jams in one engagement. I watched my sergeant die because his rifle wouldn't fire. The standard Soviet rifle, the Mosin Nagant, was a robust weapon, a Tsarist-era design from 1891. But it was a bolt-action rifle in an age demanding something faster. The semi-automatic rifles they did have, the SVT-40, were precision instruments that couldn't handle the brutality of the Eastern Front. German soldiers, meanwhile, carried the MP-40 submachine gun, close-quarters firepower that Soviet infantry couldn't match. Kalashnikov wasn't a professional weapons designer. He was a tank mechanic who'd taught himself engineering by reading technical manuals. But in that hospital bed, sketching on scraps of paper, trauma transformed into obsession. By 1942, still recovering, Kalashnikov had submitted his first design, a submachine gun. It was rejected. But the Soviet weapons establishment had noticed something. This tank sergeant thought differently. He designed for soldiers, not for engineers. The Soviet Union was desperate. They'd lost millions of men. They'd relocated entire factories eastward ahead of the German advance. They needed weapons that could be produced quickly, used by barely trained conscripts, and survive conditions that would destroy precision instruments. Kalashnikov returned to his unit, but the obsession never left. Between actions, he sketched. After the war, in 1945, he was sent to a weapons design facility. Given resources, given time, he studied everything he could: German designs captured from the battlefield, Soviet experimental weapons, American firearms obtained through Lend-Lease. One German weapon in particular caught everyone's attention: the Sturmgewehr 44, the world's first true assault rifle. It fired an intermediate cartridge, more powerful than a pistol round, less powerful than a full rifle cartridge. It was the future of infantry combat, and everyone knew it. But the Germans had lost the war. Now it was the Soviets' turn to build the future. The Soviet army holds a competition. They need a new automatic rifle, something revolutionary. Multiple design teams enter. Established gunsmiths with decades of experience face off against relative unknowns. Kalashnikov's entry has a serial number: Avtomat Kalashnikova 1947, AK-47. But here's what's crucial. This wasn't an entirely original design. Kalashnikov drew heavily from the German Sturmgewehr concept. The intermediate cartridge, the 7.62 39mm round, was clearly influenced by the German 7.92 33 Kurz. The rotating bolt design had echoes of the American M1 Garand. The trigger mechanism showed influences from the American M1 carbine. Was Kalashnikov a plagiarist? No. He was a synthesizer. He took the best ideas from multiple sources and created something that solved a uniquely Soviet problem. How do you arm millions of soldiers across the largest country on Earth, where temperatures swing from 40 to plus 40 Celsius, where mud is a season, where maintenance might mean a rag, and whatever oil you can find? The tests were brutal. Rifles were frozen, thawed, dropped, dragged through sand, submerged in water, fired until barrels glowed, given to soldiers with minimal instruction. Other designs failed, precision parts seized, complex mechanisms broke. The AK-47 kept firing. Let me show you why this weapon changed everything. It's not about what it does, it's about what it doesn't need. Detail 1. Loose tolerances. Most rifles are built to incredibly tight specifications. Parts fit together with precision measured in thousandths of an inch. Beautiful engineering, but those tight tolerances mean dirt, sand, ice, or fouling can jam the mechanism. The AK-47 has generous clearances. Parts don't fit tightly, they fit loosely. There's space for debris. This costs accuracy, especially at range, but gains something more valuable in military terms: reliability. Detail 2. Few small parts. The AK has roughly 20 moving parts depending on how you count. Compare that to the American M16 introduced in the 1960s with nearly twice as many. Fewer parts means fewer failure points. It also means a soldier in the field, with basic tools or even improvised ones, can maintain and repair the weapon. A trained soldier can field strip and reassemble an AK-47 in under a minute, in the dark, with frostbitten fingers. Detail 3. The gas system. The AK uses a long-stroke gas piston system. When you fire, some of the expanding gas from the cartridge is diverted to push a piston, which drives the bolt carrier backward, ejecting the spent casing and chambering a new round. This system is simple and violent. It throws parts around with enough force that a little dirt doesn't matter. Compare this to the direct impingement system used in early M16s, which vented gas directly into the bolt carrier, leading to carbon buildup and jams in Vietnam. Detail 4. The materials. The early AK-47s used stamped steel receivers, but these proved difficult to manufacture with Soviet industrial capacity at the time. So they switched to milled receivers, solid blocks of steel machined down. Heavier, yes. More expensive, yes, but nearly indestructible. Later variants, the AKM, introduced in 1959, returned to stamped steel with better manufacturing techniques. Lighter, cheaper, just as reliable. The result of all these choices: a weapon that could be buried for years, dug up, wiped down, and fired. Stories emerged that would become legend. One rifle, recovered in Mozambique, had been buried for 18 years, wrapped in plastic, hidden underground during a civil war. When it was finally dug up, cleaned with oil, and test-fired, it worked. Another story: Soviet soldiers in Afghanistan in the 1980s would deliberately fire their AKs after river crossings without drying them first, just to prove they could. Vietnamese fighters during the Vietnam War would submerge their AKs in rice paddies, in rivers, in monsoon mud, and return fire immediately. American soldiers in Vietnam quickly learned to recognize the distinctive sound of the AK-47, a slightly lower-pitched crack compared to the M16's higher report. That sound meant enemy contact. But let's separate myth from reality. The accuracy. Question: the AK-47 is not a precision instrument. At ranges beyond 300 meters, most Western battle rifles significantly outperform it. The loose tolerances that give it legendary reliability also mean the barrel vibrates more during firing, the sights are basic, and shot groups spread wider. In Soviet military doctrine, this didn't matter. They expected firefights at 300 meters or less. They valued volume of fire and reliability over precision marksmanship. The invincibility. Question: can you destroy an AK-47? Absolutely. Run over it with a tank, melt it in a fire, corrode it with years of neglect without any maintenance at all. The difference is the margin of error. Where another rifle might fail after one incident of abuse, the AK might survive 5, 10, 20. Here's where the story becomes global. Between 1949 and today, estimates suggest that between 75 and 100 million AK pattern rifles have been manufactured. That's roughly one AK for every 60 people on Earth. No other military firearm comes close. The Soviet Union didn't just make them, they licensed production to allied states: East Germany, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, China, North Korea. Each produced their own variants with slight modifications. China alone has produced tens of millions of Type 56 rifles, their AK variant. More AKs have been made in China than in Russia. Then there are the unlicensed copies, the black market versions, the garage-built replicas in conflict zones where an enterprising metalworker with basic tools can assemble a functional AK from parts. The economics are staggering. In stable Western markets, an AK might sell for $500 to $1,000. but in conflict zones, $30 to $150. In some parts of Africa in the 1990s, you could trade a chicken for an AK-47. Think about what that means. The barrier to entry for armed conflict dropped to almost nothing. Any group, any faction, any militia could arm itself. The AK democratized violence in ways both liberating and terrifying. Vietnam, Afghanistan, twice, Angola, Mozambique, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Somalia, Iraq, Syria. The AK has appeared in every major conflict since 1950. It became the weapon of revolution, of insurgency, of asymmetric warfare. Che Guevara carried one. Fidel Castro, the Viet Cong, the Mujahideen, Hezbollah, the Taliban. And for the Soviet Union, this was deliberate. Flooding the world with AKs extended Soviet influence without committing Soviet troops. It was foreign policy through firepower. But here's where the story becomes something stranger. The AK-47 transcended being a weapon. It became a symbol, an icon, a piece of national identity. In Soviet propaganda, the AK appeared alongside workers, soldiers, athletes. It represented strength, readiness, the defense of the socialist motherland. It was the rifle of the people, simple, honest, unbreakable. Soviet soldiers marched with AKs in Red Square. Children's toys were designed as miniature AKs. The silhouette became as recognizable as the hammer and sickle, and it spread beyond Russia's borders in ways the Soviets couldn't control. The flag of Mozambique features an AK-47 crossed with a hoe, representing defense and productivity. It's the only national flag in the world with a modern firearm on it. Hezbollah's logo, an AK-47 raised above the globe. Revolutionary groups across Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East adopted the AK as their emblem. For Russia and Russians specifically, the relationship became deeply personal. This wasn't an imported weapon designed by foreigners. This was theirs. Designed by a Russian for Russian conditions, embodying Russian values, toughness, simplicity, endurance. Ask a Russian veteran what the AK means, and you'll hear, "It never let me down. It saved my life. It was simple, like us." There's pride in that simplicity. In Western gun culture, firearms are often about precision, craftsmanship, individual customization. The AK is the opposite, standardized, mass-produced, anonymous. But that anonymity becomes democratic. Every soldier has the same weapon. It's equalizing. But every symbol has a shadow. The same qualities that made the AK beloved, its availability, its simplicity, its indestructibility, also made it the weapon of choice for terrorists, war criminals, and oppressive regimes. Child soldiers in Africa carry AKs because even a 10-year-old can operate one. Drug cartels in Mexico arm themselves with AKs, mass shootings, ethnic cleansings. The AK has been present at humanity's worst moments, and this creates an impossible tension. How do you celebrate a weapon that represents both resistance against oppression and the tool of oppressors? How do you reconcile national pride with global tragedy? This is the question that would haunt the rifle's creator for the rest of his life. Mikhail Kalashnikov lived to be 94 years old. He was celebrated as a hero of socialist labor. He received the Stalin Prize, the Lenin Prize, the Order of Lenin, the Hero of the Russian Federation Award. His face appeared on stamps, his name on museums. For most of his life, he defended his creation. He insisted he had designed it for defense of the motherland. He said he was proud of his work, that he slept soundly. But in his final years, cracks appeared in that narrative. In 2012, just a year before his death, a letter emerged, addressed to the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill. In it, Kalashnikov wrote, "I keep having the same unsolved question. If my rifle claimed people's lives, then can it be that I, a Christian and an Orthodox believer, was to blame for their deaths? The longer I live, the more this question drills itself into my brain, and the more I wonder why the Lord allowed man to have the devilish desires of envy, greed, and aggression." The letter was complex. It wasn't a simple apology or condemnation. He still maintained he designed it for defense. But the weight of millions of deaths, even in wars he didn't start by people he never met, had grown too heavy. In interviews, he would say things like, "I created a weapon for the defense of the motherland. It's not my fault that it was used where it shouldn't have been." But that distinction between intention and consequence becomes meaningless when your weapon arms both sides of nearly every conflict for 70 years. Here's the philosophical trap. If Kalashnikov hadn't invented the AK-47, someone else would have invented something similar. The technology was inevitable. The concept of an intermediate cartridge assault rifle was already proven by the Germans in World War II. So, is the inventor responsible, or is it the users? The governments that distribute weapons, the black market that proliferates them, the conflicts that demand them? There's no clean answer, and maybe that's the point. Kalashnikov died in 2013 at age 94, still wrestling with these questions. The Russian government gave him a hero's funeral. His legacy remained contradictory: patriot and symbol of destruction, defensive tool and terrorist weapon, source of pride and source of grief. The story doesn't end with Kalashnikov's death. The rifle he designed continues to evolve. The Russian arms industry has introduced modernized variants: the AK-12, adopted by the Russian Army in 2018, the AK-15. These incorporate modern materials, Picatinny rails for accessories, improved ergonomics. But the fundamental operating system remains the same. Russia has also fought to protect the Kalashnikov brand. The Kalashnikov concern, the state-owned arms manufacturer, has tried to trademark the name, to crack down on unlicensed copies, to control the narrative. It's a futile effort. You can't trademark a 75-year-old design that's been copied in dozens of countries. The AK has slipped free of any single owner. It belongs to history now. So, what does the AK-47 tell us? What does it reveal about Russia, about technology, about human nature? First, that sometimes good enough is better than perfect. The AK wasn't the most accurate, most sophisticated, or most elegant rifle ever designed. But it was good enough for what it needed to do, and that made it better than almost anything else. Second, that technology is never neutral. The AK was designed for defense, but became a tool of every kind of violence imaginable. Intention doesn't control consequence. Third, that symbols matter. The AK transcended its function to become an emblem of resistance, revolution, toughness, and terror. Its meaning shifted depending on who held it and what story they told about it. And finally, that Russians loved the AK-47, not because it was flawless, but because it was theirs. Made for their land, their climate, their hardships. It worked when other things failed. It endured when other things broke. That love is complicated, mixed with pride and regret, triumph and tragedy. But it's real. The AK-47 was never just a rifle. It was a statement, to endure, to replicate, to symbolize. Russians loved it, not despite its contradictions, but because of them. It was a weapon that represented both their greatest strengths and their deepest moral dilemmas. 75 years after its adoption, over 100 million examples later, the AK-47 remains the most recognizable weapon on Earth, a testament to engineering, a symbol of conflict, a burden of conscience. So next time you see that iconic silhouette in a museum, on a flag, in a news report from some distant conflict, ask yourself, are you looking at just a weapon? Or are you looking at a story in iron and wood, a mirror held up to human nature itself? Thanks for watching. If this story challenged how you think about weapons, technology, and history, leave a comment. And next time, we'll explore AK-47 versus AK-74, why the Soviet Union changed calibers, and what it reveals about the evolution of modern warfare.